Stay away from the briefcase, kid. It's not worth it. Get your hands up, right now. Move slowly.
Do not let that old man step off this train. The words cut through the quiet Amtrak coach just as the brakes screamed against the rails, throwing coffee across tables and every passenger forward in their seats. Heads snapped toward the back of the car where 17-year-old Jalen Brooks stood frozen beside an open luggage rack, his worn navy hoodie slightly twisted from the sudden stop, one hand still stretched toward the aisle. An expensive leather briefcase was gone. A uniformed conductor hurried past, followed by two rail security officers already asking sharp questions no one wanted to answer. "Who was standing here?" someone shouted. Before anyone could respond, a middle-aged passenger pointed directly at Jalen. That kid was. The accusation spread faster than the whispers. Every pair of eyes settled on the black teenager, who neither protested nor stepped away. Instead, he looked beyond the frightened crowd toward an elderly man sitting quietly near the front of the coach, his weathered wooden cane resting against his shoulder. "Please," Jalen said, his voice steady despite the tension tightening around him. "Just do not let him leave the train." The request made no sense. The old man had not spoken a word since boarding. He simply watched through the window as rain streaked across the glass. One security officer frowned. "We are looking for a stolen briefcase, son, not an old gentleman with a cane." Jalen lowered his hand without arguing. "I know." That answer only deepened the silence. A woman across the aisle folded her arms. "Then explain yourself." He did not. Instead, his eyes returned to the cane for the briefest moment before he looked down at the floor. The conductor announced that the train would remain at the platform until every passenger and every bag had been checked. Groans echoed through the coach. Business travelers glanced anxiously at their watches. Families tried calming restless children. At the center of it all sat Evelyn Harper, a 61-year-old white billionaire known for making billion-dollar decisions without hesitation. Dressed in an elegant navy pantsuit, she had barely looked up from her reports until the delay interrupted her schedule. Now she studied Jalen with the measured gaze that had made boardrooms fall silent for decades. She noticed something others overlooked. The boy was not watching the missing briefcase. He kept watching the old man's cane. It looked ordinary enough. Smooth oak, polished handle, rubber tip worn from years of use. Nothing about it seemed worth another glance. Yet every time someone approached the elderly passenger, Jalen's shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. A rail security officer finished checking the luggage rack and walked back carrying a pair of thin gray gloves. "We found fingerprints on the compartment where the briefcase disappeared," he announced. "We will compare them with everyone who was nearby." Several passengers instinctively looked away. Jalen quietly slipped both hands into the pockets of his hoodie without being asked. Evelyn interpreted the gesture as nervousness. Around her, murmurs grew louder. "He knows he is caught. Look at him. He is not saying a thing." The elderly passenger finally reached for his cane, slowly rising to his feet as the conductor announced that anyone cleared by security could begin exiting through the front door. Jalen's calm expression disappeared for the first time. He took one step forward, his voice sharper than before. "Please stop him." Every conversation inside the coach came to an abrupt halt because the old man had just turned around, gripping the handle of his cane so tightly that a tiny metallic sound echoed from somewhere deep inside it. The faint metallic click inside the cane lingered in the air long after the old man stopped moving. It was so brief that most passengers dismissed it as loose hardware, but Jalen's eyes locked onto the polished handle as though he had just heard the answer to a question no one else knew existed. One of the security officers stepped between them. "Sir, you are free to leave after a quick inspection." Before the elderly passenger could answer, Jalen spoke again, quieter this time. "Please ask him to stay 5 more minutes." The officer sighed. "That is enough." Around the coach, whispers hardened into certainty. A young businessman shook his head. First, he is near the missing briefcase. Now he is trying to stop an old man from getting off the train. Another passenger muttered, "He is buying time." Evelyn Harper slowly closed the leather portfolio on her lap. Years of negotiating billion-dollar deals had taught her that people under pressure often revealed themselves through small choices. Jalen had made the same choice 3 times now. He refused to defend himself. He refused to explain. Instead, he kept asking for something that seemed completely unrelated to the theft. To her, That was not honesty. It looked like strategy. She rose from her seat with calm authority. Conversations faded as people recognized her. "Young man," she said evenly, "if you know something that will help everyone here, now is the time." Jalen met her eyes. There was fear in them, but not the fear of someone caught stealing. It looked more like the fear of running out of time. "I cannot explain yet," he answered. "But if he leaves, it will be too late." Evelyn folded her arms. Too late for what? Jalen opened his mouth, then stopped himself. The silence frustrated everyone more than any answer could have. Security began checking carry-on bags one row at a time. The missing briefcase remained nowhere to be found. Then another officer returned carrying a small evidence pouch. Inside lay a clear fingerprint lift. "We have a preliminary match," he announced. "The strongest print on the briefcase handle belongs to the young man in the navy hoodie." Gasps rippled through the coach. Someone quietly said, "I knew it." Evelyn's expression cooled. The physical evidence seemed to erase the last trace of doubt. Jalen did not argue. He simply lowered his eyes for a moment before looking back toward the elderly passenger, who remained standing with both hands resting on the cane. The old man's face betrayed nothing. Rain drummed against the windows while the train sat motionless beside the platform, its engines humming beneath the uneasy silence. A child across the aisle stared at Jalen, confused, until his mother gently turned him away. The officer reached for a pair of hand restraints, but paused when the conductor hurried down the aisle holding a radio against his ear. "Wait," the conductor called. "Station security just reviewed another camera angle." Every head turned. "It does not show who took the briefcase," he continued, "but it shows something none of us noticed before." The conductor looked directly at Jalen, then slowly shifted his gaze toward the elderly passenger's cane as uncertainty spread across his face. The conductor replayed the station footage on a handheld tablet while a tight circle of passengers leaned closer, hoping for the missing piece that would settle everything. Grainy security video showed the aisle from a different angle. The leather briefcase never actually disappeared on screen. Instead, it revealed Jalen stepping into the aisle just as an elderly woman stumbled when the train lurched minutes before the emergency stop. He caught her with one arm before she fell, and in doing so his hand landed briefly on the handle of the expensive briefcase. A low murmur swept through the coach. The fingerprint suddenly made sense, yet it proved nothing about where the case had gone afterward. The suspicion remained, only wearing a different face. He touched it, one passenger insisted. That still gave him the chance to take it. Another quickly nodded. Exactly. The evidence had softened the accusation, not erased it. Evelyn watched the frozen image on the screen for several seconds. She noticed something else. Jalen had never even looked inside the briefcase. His attention had drifted past it toward the front of the coach, exactly where the elderly man with the cane had been sitting. She turned toward Jalen again. "If you noticed something on that video before anyone else did," she asked quietly, "why will you not simply tell us?" Jalen hesitated. His fingers tightened inside the pockets of his hoodie. "Because if I am wrong, I could embarrass an innocent man." The answer caught Evelyn off guard. It was the first sentence he had spoken that sounded less like a defense and more like protection. Before she could respond, one of the officers approached the elderly passenger. "Sir, we need to inspect your belongings before anyone exits." The old man smiled politely and opened his jacket without complaint. His pockets held only a train ticket, reading glasses, a folded handkerchief, and a small bottle of medication. Nothing unusual. Then the officer reached toward the cane. Before his hand touched it, the elderly passenger instinctively pulled it back a few inches. The movement lasted barely a second, but Jalen noticed. So did Evelyn. The old man immediately relaxed his grip and forced a gentle smile. "Forgive me," he said. "It has been with me for years." The explanation sounded harmless, yet the brief hesitation lingered in the air longer than anyone expected. Security examined the outside of the cane, ran a handheld scanner over it, and found nothing suspicious. Satisfied, one passenger whispered with a smug grin aimed at Jalen. The officer handed it back. "He is clear." A wave of relief crossed the old man's face, though it vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. Jalen lowered his eyes. For the first time since the ordeal began, uncertainty crept across his expression. Had he misunderstood what he thought he had seen? Had he put an innocent stranger through needless embarrassment? Evelyn studied both faces without speaking. One looked exhausted. The other looked unexpectedly relieved. Neither expression fit the story everyone believed. Just then, another security officer hurried in from the next railcar, holding the missing leather briefcase high above his shoulder. "We found it," he called out. The entire coach erupted in overlapping voices until his next sentence silenced every one of them. It was hidden inside the storage compartment of Car 7, almost 200 feet away from where this young man was standing. The announcement should have cleared Jalen. Instead, it divided the coach even further. Passengers immediately crowded around the recovered briefcase, eager to believe the mystery was over, but the lead security officer held up one hand. "No one touches it." He carefully inspected the expensive leather case before unfastening the locks. Every eye followed the slow movement. Inside were neatly stacked folders, a laptop, and several sealed envelopes. Nothing appeared missing. A ripple of confusion swept through the railcar. If everything was still inside, why had someone hidden it nearly 200 feet away? One passenger shrugged. Maybe the kid panicked and ditched it. Another quickly agreed. The story changed, but the blame stubbornly stayed with Jalen. Evelyn remained silent. She watched the teenager instead of the briefcase. Most innocent people celebrated the moment suspicion shifted away. Jalen did not. His attention drifted once more to the elderly man, whose fingers tightened around the polished cane with almost painful force. That tiny movement lasted only a heartbeat before he relaxed again, but Evelyn caught it this time. She also noticed something else. The old man's breathing had become noticeably quicker, not with fear of being accused, but with the strain of someone silently carrying an impossible burden. "Sir," Evelyn asked gently, stepping closer, "are you feeling all right?" He offered a tired smile. "Just anxious to get home." It sounded believable, yet something inside her resisted accepting such a simple answer. The security supervisor turned toward Jalen. "The briefcase being found elsewhere does not clear you. You were still the last confirmed person to touch it before it disappeared." Jalen nodded without complaint. "I understand. Then tell us what you keep staring at." The coach became perfectly still. Jalen slowly looked toward the elderly passenger. Their eyes met for the first time since the train had stopped. The old man did not look angry. He looked almost pleading. Jalen lowered his gaze. "I cannot." Frustration exploded around him. "Enough games. If you know something, say it. Stop protecting yourself." Even Evelyn felt her patience slipping away. She stepped directly in front of him. "You keep asking us to trust you while giving us no reason to." Jalen swallowed hard. "Because this is not about me anymore." The sentence landed differently than the others. Before anyone could respond, the elderly passenger unexpectedly spoke. "Young man." His voice trembled with age but carried through the silent coach. "Have we met before?" Jalen answered almost immediately. "No, sir." "Then why are you risking everything for someone you do not know?" Jalen hesitated longer than ever before. His eyes shifted toward the cane again, then back to the old man's weathered face. "Because sometimes," he said softly, "protecting someone means letting them remember the truth on their own." The words puzzled everyone, including the old man himself. A security officer finally lost patience. "This has gone far enough. We are escorting Mr. Brooks off the train at the next station while the investigation continues." He reached for the radio to notify local police. Evelyn did not stop him. She believed procedure had to come first. As the train's engines rumbled back to life and the delayed journey slowly resumed, Jalen quietly sat down without resisting, his eyes never leaving the elderly passenger. Then, almost unnoticed beneath the rhythmic clatter of the tracks, another faint metallic click echoed from deep inside the cane, and this time the old man's expression changed as though he had suddenly remembered something he had spent years trying to forget. The train rolled out of the station beneath a ceiling of dark clouds, but inside the coach the tension only tightened. No one spoke to Jalen anymore. The quiet around him felt heavier than the accusations had. Across the aisle, Evelyn Harper remained standing, one hand resting lightly against a seat back as she watched the elderly passenger settle into his chair again. His breathing had steadied, yet every few seconds his thumb unconsciously traced the smooth curve of the cane's handle. It was not the habit of someone protecting an object. It looked like someone searching for a memory. A security officer received another call through his earpiece and frowned. "The owner of the briefcase has confirmed that every document is still inside," he announced. "Nothing was stolen." Confused glances swept across the coach. Then why hide it? Someone asked. No one had an answer. The officer looked toward Jalen again. If this was not about theft, then tell me what this is about. Jalen slowly shook his head. You are asking the wrong question. The reply only deepened everyone's frustration. Evelyn finally crossed the aisle and sat in the empty seat facing him. Her voice lost the edge it had carried before. You said this stopped being about you. Help me understand that much. Jalen looked past her toward the rain sliding across the windows. Have you ever watched someone struggle to remember something they already know? Evelyn hesitated. Yes. Then you know you cannot force it. You only make it disappear faster. Before she could ask another question, a sudden jolt rippled through the train as it crossed a rough section of track. The elderly passenger instinctively gripped the cane with both hands. A faint metallic sound echoed again, louder than before. This time Evelyn heard it clearly. So did several nearby passengers. The old man stared down at the cane as though surprised by the sound himself. His forehead tightened. His lips parted slightly. Then, almost in a whisper, he murmured, "That cannot be." Jalen leaned forward for the first time since the investigation began. Do you remember now? The old man did not answer. Instead, he slowly rotated the handle between his palms. His fingers searched along the polished wood until they paused over a nearly invisible seam hidden beneath years of wear. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. I have not noticed this in. He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Security immediately stepped closer. Sir, please hand us the cane. The elderly passenger instinctively hugged it to his chest. No. The word came with surprising strength. Passengers exchanged uneasy looks. A moment earlier, he had seemed like the calmest person aboard. Now his hands trembled so violently that his knuckles turned white. Evelyn looked from the hidden seam to Jalen. For the first time since the ordeal began, she questioned her own certainty more than his silence. Jalen, she asked softly, did you see that seam before today? He slowly nodded. Not the seam. He drew a careful breath. I saw him trying to twist the handle before the train stopped. He looked frightened because it would not move. The entire coach fell silent. Suddenly, the missing briefcase no longer felt like the center of the story. Every eye shifted toward the weathered cane resting in the old man's shaking hands, just as the lead security officer made a firm decision. At the next stop, he said, that cane will be opened in front of every witness on this train. The promise to open the cane at the next station settled over the coach like a storm no one could outrun. Even the steady rhythm of the train seemed quieter, as though every mile carried the weight of whatever lay hidden beneath the polished wood. The elderly passenger slowly lowered himself back into his seat without taking his hands off the cane. His eyes no longer wandered toward the rain outside. They remained fixed on the handle, searching it with growing uncertainty, as if he had spent years carrying an answer that refused to reveal itself. Jalen stayed exactly where he was. He never moved closer. He never demanded the cane be opened. That restraint confused Evelyn more than anything else. If he had been trying to prove himself right, now was the moment to press harder. Instead, he looked almost worried for the old man. The security supervisor approached with calm authority. Sir, for everyone's protection, I will need you to surrender the cane when we reach the next station. The elderly passenger lifted his eyes. They were filled not with anger, but with quiet fear. Please, he whispered. Not until I understand why that young man keeps looking at it. Every conversation in the coach faded. Evelyn turned toward Jalen. You have one chance, she said softly. Tell him what you saw. Jalen drew a slow breath. I saw you trying to twist the handle before the train stopped. You looked frightened when it would not open. That is all I know. The old man's brow tightened. He carefully turned the cane again, his fingertips brushing the hidden seam. His breathing grew uneven. I remember, trying to fix something. He stopped. His expression clouded again. No, maybe that was years ago. He closed his eyes as though chasing a memory that dissolved each time he reached for it. The uncertainty spread through the coach. Some passengers who had eagerly blamed Jalen now exchanged uneasy glances. Others refused to let go of their original conclusion. This changes nothing, one man insisted. The kid is still hiding something. Another nodded toward the recovered briefcase. We still do not know why it ended up 2 cars away. The security supervisor agreed. Exactly. Until we have every answer, no one is cleared. He turned toward Jalen. You will leave this train with us when we arrive. Jalen accepted the words without argument. He simply looked at the elderly passenger one final time before lowering his gaze to the floor. Evelyn watched that silent exchange and felt something inside her shift. For the first time, she wondered whether the greatest burden in the coach belonged not to the man carrying the cane, but to the teenager willing to let the world misunderstand him if it meant protecting someone else's dignity. The train whistle echoed through the rain as the next station appeared beyond the windows. Uniformed transit police were already waiting on the platform. The doors had barely begun to unlock when the security supervisor stepped toward Jalen. Come with us. At that exact moment, the elderly passenger suddenly clutched the cane against his chest with both hands, his face draining of color. He stared at the handle in stunned silence before looking directly at Jalen. His voice trembled so deeply that every person in the coach instinctively froze. Young man, he whispered, I finally remember what is inside this cane. The doors slid open, the waiting officers stepped aboard, and the security supervisor reached for Jalen's arm at the very same instant the old man cried out, Do not let them take him away. The word struck the coach harder than the emergency brakes ever had. Do not let them take him away. Every transit officer stopped mid-step. The security supervisor released his grip on Jalen's arm and turned toward the elderly passenger, whose hands were trembling so violently that the cane nearly slipped onto the floor. Evelyn instinctively moved closer, steadying the old man's elbow before he lost his balance. He looked at her without really seeing her. His eyes had drifted somewhere far beyond the train, beyond the rain-soaked station, into a memory that had finally forced its way back to the surface. I have been carrying it all this time, he whispered. All this time. No one interrupted him. Even the restless passengers who had spent the last hour judging Jalen stood in complete silence. The old man slowly laid the cane across his lap. His fingers searched once more for the nearly invisible seam hidden beneath the polished wood. This time they stopped with certainty instead of hesitation. He pressed his thumb against a tiny worn notch that years of use had disguised. A soft click echoed through the coach. The handle loosened. A collective gasp swept across the passengers. The elderly man carefully twisted the top free. Inside the hollow shaft rested a slim metal storage drive wrapped inside yellowed cloth. It slid into his shaking palm as though it had been waiting years to see daylight again. Tears immediately filled his eyes. I remember now, he breathed. I hid this myself. The security supervisor stared in disbelief. What is it? The old man could barely answer. Evidence. The single word changed the air inside the coach. He looked toward Jalen, his face filled not with fear anymore, but with overwhelming gratitude. I was terrified someone would steal it months ago before the court hearing. I hid it inside my cane because no one would ever think to look there. His voice cracked. Then my memory began slipping. I forgot I had done it. The passengers slowly looked back at Jalen. Every strange decision he had made suddenly began fitting together. He had never chased the missing briefcase. He had never tried to accuse the old man. He had only tried to stop him from leaving before the truth disappeared forever. Evelyn lowered her eyes for a moment, replaying every harsh conclusion she had silently reached. Jalen had accepted suspicion, accepted humiliation, even accepted being taken into police custody rather than force an elderly stranger into public embarrassment over something that might have been an innocent mistake. The old man carefully unfolded the cloth around the storage drive. A faded adhesive label still clung to one side in shaky handwriting. His expression collapsed into quiet sorrow. These are the original files, he whispered. The ones that prove I never falsified the engineering reports. His breathing became uneven again. I thought they had been stolen. The security supervisor immediately accepted the drive without removing it from its protective cloth. We will document everything properly. Before he could continue, Jalen finally spoke. Please let him hold it. The officer paused, then slowly returned it to the old man's hands. No one objected. The coach had completely changed sides. Yet one question still remained unanswered. The recovered briefcase had not hidden the evidence. Someone had deliberately moved it almost 200 feet away, creating the confusion that turned every eye toward Jalen. The security supervisor looked toward the conductor with growing concern. Find out who entered car 7 before the emergency stop. The conductor nodded and reached for his radio while Evelyn quietly stepped beside Jalen. She looked at him for several long seconds before saying the words she wished she had spoken much sooner. "I owe you more than an apology." Just then, the conductor lowered the radio, his face suddenly pale. "We have another problem," he said. "The station cameras just identified the person who moved the briefcase, and according to the timestamp, that person is still somewhere on this train." The conductor enlarged the station footage on the tablet until every face inside car 7 became visible. One by one, the passengers leaned closer. A maintenance worker pushed a supply cart through the aisle. A mother guided 2 children toward the cafe car. Then a man wearing a dark rain jacket appeared for only a few seconds. He lifted the leather briefcase from an overhead rack, carried it into the storage compartment, closed the door, and calmly continued walking. No one inside the coach recognized him. "He was never sitting with us," one passenger whispered. The security supervisor immediately radioed the station officers. Within minutes, the answer came back. The man had stepped off the train during the emergency stop before anyone realized the briefcase was missing. He had not stolen anything. He had simply moved it. The reason remained a mystery, but one truth became undeniable. Jalen could never have hidden the briefcase where it was found because he had never left the coach. The silence that followed felt different from every silence before it. It carried relief, regret, and the uncomfortable weight of rushed judgment. The security supervisor slowly removed the investigation form bearing Jalen's name. Without saying a word, he folded it in half. Evelyn watched the paper disappear into the officer's case. It was a small gesture, yet it erased an accusation that had nearly changed a young man's life forever. She stepped toward Jalen, no longer with the confidence of a celebrated executive, but with the humility of someone confronting her own mistake. "I looked at evidence," she said quietly, "but I stopped looking at the person standing in front of me." Jalen offered only a gentle nod. There was no triumph in his expression, no desire to make anyone feel smaller. That simple grace struck Evelyn harder than any criticism could have. Nearby, the elderly passenger still held the small storage drive wrapped in its faded cloth. His trembling had eased, replaced by careful determination. The security supervisor invited him to verify the contents in the presence of witnesses. An evidence technician connected the drive to a secured department laptop. The screen slowly filled with folders, engineering reports, signed inspection records, and dated photographs. The old man's eyes watered before the first file had even finished opening. "These are mine," he whispered. "Every original document is here." The officer compared the timestamps with copies already requested from the courthouse. They matched perfectly. A quiet breath escaped the elderly man as years of uncertainty seemed to lift from his shoulders. He turned toward Jalen with tears shining in his eyes. "You protected something I had forgotten to protect myself." Jalen smiled for the first time that day. "You carried it all along. I only asked everyone to wait." Around them, passengers who had avoided his gaze earlier now stepped forward one after another. A businessman extended his hand. The mother gently encouraged her young son to wave. Even those who found no words lowered their eyes with quiet respect as they passed him. Evelyn remained where she stood, watching each silent apology unfold without being requested. She reached into her briefcase, removed a simple white business card, then paused before offering it. This moment was not about influence or opportunity. It was about earning the right to speak. "When this journey ends," she said softly, "I hope you will let me make one thing right." Before Jalen could answer, the security supervisor received one final message through his radio. He looked toward the elderly passenger and smiled for the first time since boarding the train. "The courthouse has confirmed they will reopen your case immediately because of what was recovered today." The old man closed his eyes as tears rolled down his weathered face, but Jalen quietly glanced out the rain-speckled window, as though he already understood that the greatest victory of the day had never been about proving himself innocent. The train reached Chicago just after sunrise beneath a sky that had finally broken open into pale blue. No one rushed for the doors this time. The same passengers who had once turned away from Jalen now quietly stepped aside, creating a clear path without anyone asking them to. The elderly passenger remained seated for another moment, the restored storage drive resting carefully inside both hands. He looked at it, then at the weathered cane lying across his lap. For months it had felt like nothing more than a walking aid. Now it had become proof that memory could fail without truth ever disappearing. Before leaving the train, he slowly stood and walked toward Jalen. There was no dramatic speech waiting, only a pair of tired eyes filled with gratitude. "You trusted me when I could not even trust my own mind," he said softly. Jalen smiled with the same quiet kindness that had carried him through every accusation. "You deserved the chance to remember before someone else decided your story for you." The old man reached out, and Jalen accepted the gentle handshake. Around them, several passengers wiped away tears they had not expected to shed on an ordinary train ride. Outside on the platform, investigators carefully documented the recovered evidence before escorting the elderly passenger toward waiting legal representatives. The engineering files were immediately placed into official custody, and within weeks the reopened case reached the conclusion he had feared would never come. Independent experts confirmed the original records had always supported his work. Years of doubt ended not because someone discovered new evidence, but because forgotten truth had finally been remembered. Evelyn Harper followed the proceedings quietly from a distance. For someone accustomed to solving problems with influence and resources, this was different. Nothing she owned could erase the moment she had looked at a frightened teenager and assumed the worst. Several days later, she invited Jalen to her office overlooking the Chicago skyline. He arrived wearing the same navy hoodie and carrying the same worn backpack. Nothing about him had changed. Evelyn noticed that before anything else. She slid a folder across the table but did not ask him to open it. "This is not a reward," she said. "It is a promise." Inside was the proposal for a new mentorship initiative created by her foundation, dedicated to young people whose character had been overlooked because others judged them too quickly. She asked Jalen to become its first youth advisor, not because he had endured suspicion, but because he had shown uncommon courage without ever demanding recognition. Jalen read the pages in silence before looking back at her. "If it helps someone else be heard sooner than I was, then yes." Months later, the program welcomed its first students. Some arrived carrying perfect grades. Others carried difficult stories. Every one of them was greeted before they were evaluated. On the opening day, the elderly engineer appeared as an honored guest, leaning once again on the same polished cane. This time it was empty inside, exactly as he wanted it to be. He laughed more easily now. Evelyn greeted each student personally instead of watching from a stage. Jalen stood near the entrance, shaking every hand that reached his. As another train rolled past beyond the windows, its whistle echoing across the city, the old cane rested quietly beside its owner, no longer hiding forgotten evidence, but forever reminding everyone that the heaviest truths are often carried in silence until one person chooses to believe before the proof arrives.